Hello, this is Freethought Forum, a program by the Atheist Society of Knoxville and the Rationalists of East Tennessee. I'm Shawnee Castile.
And I'm Joe Barnhart.
And I'm Riv.
We want you to know that if you don't believe in God, you are not alone. Right here in East Tennessee, you can find free-thinking atheists and agnostics. This is a show for them and for people committed to a life rooted in science and unfettered by supernatural beliefs. Today's show will be about humanism, which we assert is a better moral foundation.
Okay, now where am I on this?
Right there, but we're going to go ahead and tell you about some of the show's sponsors right now.
Yeah, let's do that. Okay, where am I?
It's still kind of mixed up.
Sorry, we had a little traffic
go ahead.
incident on the way. The Atheist Society of Knoxville frequently has a fun meetup at a bar or eatery. Tonight's meetup is at Flats and Taps at West Hills, 7403 Kingston Pike, Knoxville, Tennessee, 37919. When you get to the meetup, look for the silver-jacketed copy of The God Delusion standing upright on the table, or just a large group of people in the middle of the restaurant. As Matt Dillahunty at the Atheist Experience says, everyone is welcome to our happy hour for food, drink, and conversation. But if you plan to preach, proselytize, punch, or provoke, please don't.
Okay, the Rationalists of East Tennessee have regular meetings, first and third Sunday mornings of the month. Usually there are discussions with some lectures sometimes. The second Sunday we hold the Skeptics Book Club. On the fourth Sunday we're all mixing up, sometimes a potluck meal and a reflection meeting. And later in the show we will give you a website and additional details, times, and locations.
And finally, we want to alert viewers that starting in January, we will be appearing on a new day and time. Watch the show Wednesdays at 6:30 to 7:30 p.m. Again, this begins in January, Wednesday night, 6:30 to 7:30 p.m.
Okay, now do we move into our program now?
We are in the news right now.
Let's go to some news.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
That, some way behind everything, but there is a article that I believe graced the page of the Humanist, wasn't it?
Oh, we're starting with that? Okay. Actually, yes. I wrote an article and submitted it to the Humanists, which is a section of the American Humanist Association, and it was published today. It is regarding discriminatory interview processes. I went on a job interview, everything was going great, and then they brought up religion and politics, two things that I very much do not believe should ever be brought up in an interview. Unless, of course, you're interviewing at a church or whatnot. It went on for long enough for me to actually stop them and tell them that what they were doing was not legal and that I did not appreciate it. But you can check out the full article at thehumanist.com. It was front page today, but I'm sure it will be pushed back quickly. So that was an interesting turn of events for today for me.
Yeah. Okay, now you next, or am I?
We're just rolling with this. In the news today also, we've got that slide. Flat Earth was proven by an internet meme.
Which one was that?
This is the lunar eclipse section.
That's funny.
We don't have the slide exactly up right now, but it is a beautiful lunar eclipse from the flat Earth, and it is a picture of the lunar eclipse with a... It's the symbol for the turtle that carries the Earth on its back. It was quite amusing.
Isn't that is it Hinduism? Isn't it the endless, or is it, I forget the one, the infinitely regressing turtles stacked upon one another?
Right, yeah, absolutely.
Oh, there you go.
Okay, and we've got one more thing in the news. Some of you may have heard already last week. One of the issues that the Freedom from Religion Foundation East Tennessee has been dealing with is an issue in Knox County Health Department, a religious display at someone's desk, at an employee's desk, that is pointed directly at the public. While the FFRF East Tennessee is not asking that the display be completely removed, but be turned to where the public cannot view it. What this does is give the impression that the county government endorses one particular religion over another, and this one being Christianity. This was passed on to Mayor Burchett's office. Mayor Burchett essentially said that He was not going to do anything about the display, claimed that it was a violation of the employees' First Amendment rights, completely dismissing the fact that it is a government building, a county building. So this issue has now been turned over to the attorneys at the Freedom from Religion Foundation in Wisconsin, and they will determine what further action is to be taken.
Was this on the screen itself?
It's on, when you walk into the Vital Records Department, it's on a cork board at an employee's desk, and it faces, when you walk up to get your birth certificate, whatnot, it is facing, and they're saying it's one Christian poem, but it's actually multiple Christian displays. And again, FFRF East Tennessee is not asking that the employee completely remove it, just turn it where it's not visible to the public, where it's maybe facing them and it's more visible to them actually versus looking at the back of their head.
The charges are using the state to promote a particular religion.
Right, the employee is. Yeah. Correct. And that's all I've got for in the news now.
You do have state schools which will offer courses in religion studies. In fact, a variety of religions, but those are usually free courses. In other words, if you want to study, because that's what academic life's about, is you study, but nobody's forced to take a course.
Right, and in the public school system, as far as middle school, high school, it's completely acceptable to teach the Bible as long as you teach it from an English standpoint or a writing standpoint versus from a religious standpoint.
In fact, when I was in high school, I think it was high school, I took a course in the Bible. Unfortunately, the teacher, I later learned, didn't know that much about the subject, but at least they were doing it. And I didn't either at that time. I was just probably about 15 or so. I mean, I'd read the Bible, but I hadn't really studied it that great.
Right. Yeah, it's definitely a gray line with religion in public schools. If you're going to teach them one, you need to teach them all. And that's one thing here in our area that we have to deal with pretty consistently. I'm dealing with an issue with Blount County schools right now as well.
In a university, you can have open discussion.
Absolutely.
That's a different ballgame. When they've got kids, that's another problem.
Yeah, absolutely.
And also something that Texas was battling here recently, I believe, relatively recently. There has been some losses, some victories, I think. Oren Rawl was talking about it. It's deliberately trying to ask in a strategic way, how can we promote questions in which create skepticism in basically the secular methods, and how can we ask things in such a way that create likelihood in biblical narratives. And that was trying to be pushed straight through, and I think it failed. But it is very telling that it's even being tried to be pushed through.
Do you know who in this country was the forerunner of church-state separation? What denomination he was?
It was Madison at the beginning, wasn't it?
Before Madison. Roger Williams.
Okay.
And the Baptists have forgotten their own tradition, some of them.
Right.
But you had the Puritans, and Roger Williams came up with the notion of church-state separation. You need to have all those groups having the freedom to propagate their own views, and the state does not interfere.
Yeah,
and you can criticize each other too, and the state does not interfere, as long as you keep the civil peace.
It's my understanding that up until the early 1950s, that each denomination of Christianity was considered a separate religion. I'm not sure where I remember seeing that, but it was kind of they went on a united front against communism, and that's when we had
you do have
the McCarthyism. And
you do have various denominations, and they differ among themselves, and just as among naturalists, you have different. Among atheists, you have great difference. You got Joe Stalin, an atheist. I certainly have a lot more in common with a lot of Christians than I do Joseph Stalin, or my Jewish neighbors. I have a lot more in common with them, and I had some Buddhist friends that were humanists. And that's what we're going to talk about today, is humanism as a moral foundation.
Absolutely.
Okay, are you ready to talk about it? We got another topic we're going to come up for.
We can go right into the program at this point.
Okay, well, especially some Jews, Christians, and Buddhists and atheists have much in common with each other, sometimes on moral standards, more than they do with some of their fellow Christians or Jews or Muslims. Depends upon the individuals. But I learned about humanism when I was in the Baptist seminary. because that's part of the Baptist tradition.
Mm-hmm.
In fact, they had to do that to get separation from the Puritans. And then they realized that if you have a good common human foundation, then the Catholics and Jews and Buddhists and atheists and others can live together in peace. When I go on an airplane, I don't ask if the pilot is an atheist or a Jew. I ask if he can fly the plane.
Right.
Yeah, it's related, but I think it's interesting. There's the notion that, for instance, in politics, right? It's essentially apropos to suggest that someone run and not be in some way deist or somehow religiously affiliated. But at the same time, we'll use secular methods, such as in medicine, you'll pray and pray and pray. But when it comes to the point where prayer is not effective, then we'll go with the surgery. So it's trying to preserve both of those at the same time.
Yeah.
And
what helps the patient is primarily what the medicine tradition is about.
Mm-hmm.
Well, let's talk then specifically about naturalistic humanism. Does that make sense to you?
Mm-hmm.
By naturalism, we mean is over against the notion of supernaturalism.
Correct.
And of course, we were talking earlier. This means in a country like this, if you have supernaturalist neighbors, you show respect for them, but you can differ. In fact, I'm old enough to have differed with myself many times on a lot of subjects.
I have as well.
And that's part of rational thinking, I think.
Yeah.
And I like being married because if my wife sometimes will say, "Are you sure you believe that or think that?" And that makes me pause and say, "Yeah, I guess I better look at it again." And we've been married 46 years. It works.
And we can absolutely respect other individuals without respecting their belief system.
That's a good point.
That's a big difference. I can respect you as a human being and what you do, but I don't have to show any respect for your particular belief system.
Yeah, you could say, well, I just can't subscribe to that, but I can appreciate the fact that you can. You're free to do so, and let's talk about it.
Right.
And that's what we want to do this time. Now let's talk about how does ethics get started and how do we keep it? What is ethics anyhow? And let's suggest the possibility. Ethics has basically to do with freedom, satisfying your wants. And immediately we discover we live in a naturalistic world of nature, and we live in a community, which means we can't do everything we want to do. Otherwise, we wouldn't have a free society. We would have chaos.
Right.
If we were alive at all. So we learned if you're going to drive a car or a truck. I noticed today driving, I had to slow down in the rain.
Yes.
And my fellow drivers to keep distance. That's structure and order. And that's what ethics is about, having structure and order and dependability so that the other drivers on the road with me or with you can depend upon each other to go by certain rules and regulations and guidelines. And fortunately, I'm here safe this afternoon because of that.
Right. Yeah, I mean, and that's one thing that just being a human being, we have to pay attention to.
Yeah, it's a really good point about the driving, is if we can't have the basic assumption that, for instance, this chair, right? We have a just assumption that this chair will hold our weight and it won't fall over. Extended to society, if we also have walls in place that at least in a minimal way, kind of guide us into what is efficiently natural, and in such a way that lets us kind of.
So you're saying we live in a natural world we depend upon, and in a community, and the community makes these chairs, or part of the community, and we depend upon each other.
We need to we need to know, at least to a certain point, that we can rely upon how we interact with people just to get by day to day, versus a book at some point in history saying, do this because it is good and don't do this because it is bad.
Yeah, it's what our parents taught us, reliability, dependability.
Yeah.
And it works.
Right, and like the road situation, our turn signals are there for a reason. I will never understand the person that will not let somebody with their turn signal on merge into traffic. Like, to me, that's just basic decency.
It's frustrating.
They're showing you that they need to get over, whether the lane's ending or whatever.
Speed up.
And they'll speed, yes, they'll speed up. And I'm like, what is going on here?
Well, you're right.
I slow down and usually, flash my lights at them to let them know that I'm letting them in, but
I had an Uncle Theodore when I was learning to drive. I like what he said. Joe, that was a stop sign, not a slow down sign. And I had to learn the difference.
Right?
And the difference means sometimes between life and death, or an accident and $1,000 to pay for it.
Right, or you causing someone else's death, which is
So is it fair to say
horrible.
that in some ways ethics starts with the desire for freedom and pleasure? And then you learn that if you're going to have pleasure and happiness, you live in a real world, and then you have to obey certain structures, certain regulations and guidelines from nature and from the community. And if you play sandlot football or basketball, the kids get together and they may make up their own rules for the game, but they know once they have the rules, it's not a game unless they go by it.
right.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think, too, ethics come a lot from just empathy, the basic of morality.
That's a
empathy.
good point. Yeah. That's a golden rule.
Yeah, absolutely. Treat people how you would want somebody to treat you. And
Put yourself in the other person's point of view.
Exactly.
Yeah, that's
right.
And that's universal if you're going to have a community. And most of our mothers taught us that. If you have siblings, how would you like your brother to treat you that way?
Right. And unfortunately, there are a lot of people that aren't taught
Yeah, unfortunately.
this basic empathy. We're dealing with that a lot right now in our political arena. And
that's a good
whatnot.
point.
There's a parable that mentioning about being taught and how would you like if you be treated that way. It reminds me of an example often given that if, say, two unruly children are told each separately by their parents, stop doing this, but the reasoning is in fear of punishment versus how would you feel if this was done to you. The next time it'll be one comes from understanding and empathy, the other comes from out of pure fear.
Right.
And that seems so basic, but yet I think we often see the case of just ruled by fear.
Well, that brings us back to her notion of empathy is saying, well, if I'm inside that person's skin, I would want people to treat me this way.
Which includes hypotheticals. For instance, in dealing with, let's take the case of racism, for instance. Someone who's just they're racist and that's how their parents were. That's going on and on. That's just reality to them. So when you ask them and present the question, how would you feel if you woke up and all of a sudden you were that ethnicity? Then there might be one or two things, right? You might have a cognitive dissonance that says, well, that's ridiculous to even ask. Why even that'll never happen. But if you entertain the question, then you have a shifting of neurons and perspective, and that can be, can grow empathy. I mean,
Or when you have somebody who is a racist or a white supremacist or whatnot, and then they have a grandchild that is biracial or multiracial, a lot of times they completely do a turnaround because they have this grandchild and they're not going to reject their grandchild because of the color of their grandchild's skin, and it starts to click a little bit. Like, what have I been doing this whole time? I'm not going to reject my grandchild for being born this color. And
so part of ethics is being able to expand your imagination to get inside another frame of reference.
yeah, absolutely.
So ethics and rational thinking in that sense go together.
Yes, absolutely.
And it also explains a lot of origins. I mean, it goes hand in hand with creativity too, which would explain a lot how, people in the ancient world would come up with these concepts of insert your religion and well, this makes sense and that makes sense, and of course there's the cultural significance of it. So, so for instance, let's say, this is my take on it that I've come across. It seems to make sense. Maybe I'm wrong on it, but For instance, when you have, for instance, biblical edicts commanding basically to not eat, bottom dwellers and don't mix your linens and things of that nature. To my understanding, that might have been a cultural approach to, well, we didn't have refrigerators back then.
For sure.
So if you eat these bottom dwellers, you might die.
Yeah, I'm old enough to have had an ice box before a refrigerator.
That's right,
Had
yeah.
to carry big loads of ice in.
Yeah.
So my mother would say, don't keep that door open, close it, because she didn't want the ice to melt.
Right, icebox, remember that, yeah.
Yeah.
The ice box, yeah.
Yeah.
Well, can secularists talk about faith?
We've got a caller real quick.
Yeah, good.
Ready to take one, Joe?
Yeah, go ahead. Our caller, go ahead. Are you on?
Hey Joe, it's Charles from
Can you talk louder?
Hey Joe, it's Charles from Central Illinois.
Oh, we got you. It's Charles from the speaker. Give him a moment to catch up. Hello, Charles.
Hello.
There we go.
Go ahead.
When considering humanism,
Huh?
if you examine many of the religions, you'll discover that a lot of them have many of the same core concepts and ideas.
Uh-huh.
One of my favorite versions of Christianity is the Jefferson Bible,
Mm-hmm.
which removes all the supernatural elements of the New Testament, leaves in with many of the core principles that Christ spoke of, and as moral guides.
Uh-huh. Uh-huh.
Now, humanism is basically the same concept, what we would feel to be right and proper to do without having to call upon divine justice or divine retribution to follow.
Mm-hmm.
Have any of you seen the Jefferson Bible out there, maybe Joe?
Yes, and you're right. It's basically a humanistic ethic,
Right.
and he's called a deist. And that means God creates the world, keeps it in order, his view, and then you guys down there run it.
Right. It's the watchmaker.
Exactly.
Clockmaker
Yeah.
create the universe and then step away.
And Jefferson did this country a great favor to help promote church-state separation, so that churches could develop on their own and have the freedom to develop their differences among themselves without, putting each other in jail the way they did in Europe.
Right. Or a government forcing one specific religion or religious doctrine on everyone.
Yeah. So that John Bunyan doesn't have to go to jail.
Right. Or the
He
church
could-
running the government.
He can write Pilgrim's Progress instead.
There you go.
And it makes for a more enjoyable, and Christians have discovered, it makes for them more freedom to develop their own religion. And by develop, they mean they make changes within it,
Right.
just as a humanist change. I've had some humanist friends that are afraid of the word faith. I said, "Are you married?" And I asked one guy, "How many times?"
Yeah.
Because with marriage, you have a lot of faith and trust. That's all faith is trust. I'm trusting in the guy who built this chair.
Yep.
Well,
And so far it's working, isn't
It
it?
is.
Yeah.
We have evidence that it works.
Yeah. So,
Okay, the difference between religious faith and secular faith is we're basing our faith on things that we can feel, touch, talk about, and share. Religious faith is often what I refer to as blind faith.
Yes.
Except without any consideration, any asking questions, any testing out to see if it's valid and true.
And a lot of it seems to be also another thing. Even if you can't test something physically, tangibly, we have ways of making reasonable inferences from evidence,
Right.
and that seem the most likely plausible explanation.
yeah, to see if it's coherent.
Right.
It's evidence-based faith.
If it's consistent, if it can be reproducible under the right circumstances, and even then, if it falls into all the other subsets of data. And one of the most frustrating things in that regard with religious faith is that it almost requires a kind of indoctrination to begin,
All
begin accepting it?
all views require initial indoctrination. What does that mean? We got to, well, you learn the multiplication tables.
Right.
And that's indoctrination. And then you can use it.
Now,
Go ahead.
it used to be said that believe so you can understand. I believe that was the Christian Catholic Church that insisted that you can't understand anything unless you believe first.
I've heard that before.
And that sets up the problem of self-authenticating concepts and ideas that you cannot test.
Well, let's talk about falling in love. It's a similar thing here. Suppose you're really fond of someone, not married, and you've known them now 3 weeks. You ready for marriage? After 3 weeks?
Some people are.
Depends.
And after how many years? How much? When does the divorce come on?
Right? 3 months?
So any time of adventure like that, you have to have a mixture of faith, trust, and rational thinking, testing, empiricism. My wife and I have been married 46 years. I dated her the first year 1 time, the second year 12 times, and the third year I lost track.
Yeah.
And furthermore, we had very good friends who knew us, and they could give us their opinions and their reservations. I'm sure she heard more reservations than I heard.
Oh, are you telling yourself?
But that was very useful to us, though, to know who we were going to be married to. And that's
Yes.
faith and trust plus reason.
Right. And
Now, the thing about humanism is that it also requires something that I don't hear much about from a lot of the religious blowhards I see on television and so forth. Empathy,
yes,
which is different from sympathy.
absolutely.
Well, I happened to go to a seminary that was very open-minded, and empathy was a major point. You learned about different viewpoints, and unfortunately, they had the big argument at that seminary because the fundamentalists wanted to take over.
Which they
And
have.
those who were running the seminary and the teachers say, well, we believe in education. What's your ball game?
Right.
So if you're going to have an education center, you have to have multiple viewpoints, and you have to have critical analysis. Otherwise, it's not education. It's just an indoctrination program.
Right. And I'm afraid that religion in general has strayed from that.
Well, some of it depends on which religion you talk about, which religion person.
Yeah.
I had a Baptist minister once encouraged me to read the atheists. He said, if you're not careful, you might learn something. He was teasing me. I was just a kid, but he was right.
It took a little bit, didn't it?
Yeah.
So there's a good deal in humanism because there are humanist Christians,
Yeah.
humanist Muslims, humanist atheists.
Buddhist, yeah, good point.
Yes. So humanism is not just a secular viewpoint.
Right. I mean, there are specific people that are secular humanists, but it's not exclusively secular individuals. You're very right on that.
Yeah, and a good point is not all secularists are humanists.
Absolutely.
Right,
This I have
True.
Yeah, we have plenty of
seen some very terrifying viewpoints that would in no way
Yeah.
be considered humanistic in nature.
That's true,
In,
yeah.
I mean,
Terrifying is right.
terrifying. Like, I'm just going to group you with the Nazis and never speak to you again type viewpoints.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
All right. Thank
I'll
you,
let
Charles.
go of the show.
You remember the
Thanks, Charles.
the story of the on one Christmas season, the Nazis and the Allies stopped the war for a while. Remember that story?
I remember that.
And they sang to each other.
Yeah, it was a day of reprieve from all the combat.
Yeah, that's a very moving story, and I think it'd be good with atheists and Baptists and Methodists to do this more often. to show what we do have in common with each other.
So I've actually done that during Knoxville Pride.
Oh, yeah.
Like I've had people come up and say religious things, and been with like my sister, and her immediately start to jump, and I'm like, not today. Today we get along with everybody. This is not about us.
Find out what you got in
And
common.
I completely. That's one thing I won't do is engage in.
When you go to the doctor, do you say, are you a Methodist or a Baptist or an atheist? Do you do that? No, we won't know if he's good at his skill.
I do ask if they believe that in women's choice.
Well, yeah, of course.
But that's pertinent at a doctor's
Yeah.
office. Their religious beliefs, they
Well, of
don't
course.
matter to me as long as they're doing their job.
Exactly. Yeah, but the question you raise of women's choice is a very appropriate question.
It's pertinent to going to the doctor's office.
And there's a philosophy / martial art that I really appreciate. That was founded by Morihita. I'm butchering the name. Morihita.
You're doing better than I could.
But anyhow, go ahead.
Well, basically, it's a martial art / philosophy where it originated in Japan, and it's called Aikido. And I really like this philosophy and martial arts very powerful as well, but
Sure.
it relies more on defense. But the whole point of it reminds me of it's the physical embodiment of the Socratic method. So when you're having either the combat with someone or you're having a conversation with someone under this philosophy, you want to see it always as an opportunity to learn more about them and yourself and to come to a peaceful resolution with the minimal amount of harm to both you and them.
That's a good point. Even in a debate, you attack the viewpoint and not the person.
Right.
In fact, often you enter a debate because you want to have your own view criticized, because you like to develop your view. If it's got flaws
Ideally.
Ideally, if you've got flaws in it, you don't want to live with them the rest of your life. So,
Right.
Well, if you're a rational person,
well, sure.
yeah.
And one of the so easy it is to jump into a thing originally, at least instinctually, perhaps thinking I have a view and I want to proclaim it. But then eventually, I think you can mold into, well, I'm curious about this, and when it becomes a situation where you're just waiting to restate your point without even listening to what the other person said, then you run into a problem.
That's a good point. Learning to listen is part of it.
It happens pretty often. I mean, it happens in micro ways throughout the midst of a conversation, perhaps. Even in the time we've been in the air, it might be getting to have a sentence and then have another point to follow. And I'm guilty of this. Have a point so quickly. I really want to make this point, but then you have to maybe take a step back and say, well, this point is less relevant. They made a better point. And that's, not easy to do automatically, but I think it's the better direction to go.
I think it falls under empathy as well. Like, you want somebody to listen to you, you need to learn how to listen to other people.
That's a good point.
And you might not agree. You might absolutely not agree with what they're saying, but you can't even come to an educated or a rational opinion or viewpoint if you're not even listening to what they're saying.
That's a good point. Yeah. You can't disagree until you know what the other view is.
Yeah.
And you have to listen. That was your point. You have to listen.
Yeah.
I think it's a skill to develop.
Yeah. Yeah. Is there a book out called The Third Ear? I've forgotten who wrote it, but he was a counselor. And his view is, if you're a counselor, in fact, I'm writing a novel now with the woman is a counselor. And she doesn't give a lot of advice. She learns to listen.
Okay.
And I learned this from a man who was teaching preachers. He said, when you're counseling, remove the pulpit. And that was his way of putting it.
That's a good way to put it.
He said, you got one pulpit and two ears. And that was a good advice.
Like that.
And Carl Rogers is saying, if you learn to listen, then the people will talk more freely, and then gradually they will catch their own inconsistencies, maybe.
That seems kind of consistent with Anthony Magdabasio, wherever teaches the street epistemology. He does that a lot. He'll engage in conversation with someone, and he'll ask them, well, how do you feel about this? And how confident do you feel about this? And Does this make sense? So and so on. Just ask it and then let it sit. And almost inevitably, when the other person is expecting a rebuttal, but he doesn't give a rebuttal, he just lets it sit silent, they'll say, well, also, and also, and they're arguing with themselves. So it's fascinating if you just give people the moment to realize what they're saying. And I'll try to be quick about it. A couple of days ago, it was an evening. I was home, roommate was home. I'm going to knock on the door. I get kind of nervous when people knock on the door. I'm not expecting them. That's just me.
I don't even answer. Like, nobody in my house answers the door if we're not expecting.
Yeah, I mean, it was like 8 o'clock at night or something. And I'm thinking, I'm not, okay, we'll go open the door. And it's this woman, and she had a little tablet with her. And she was basically asking, well, can I tell you, can I like to talk to you about Jesus? And so, well, sure. And so I go out there, and I'm trying to be good-spirited about it. And she just had a pitch she was going off, kind of an asymmetrical. She wasn't interested, seemingly, learning in anything or trying to ask questions. This is just a pitch you're making, a sales pitch.
It's a sales pitch, yeah.
Yeah, and then so when she brings up some things about morality and everything, I try to ask the question, well, if you accept this, wouldn't that also mean that you need to accept that talks about stoning to death unruly children and burning people who are homosexual and all these things? You just didn't even hear me. She's just going one to the next point.
Right.
Yeah.
And it's
Now, we got a caller. Let's see what we got here.
Oh, actually, we don't have a caller. Sorry, it's my fault.
Okay. Well,
It is time to go ahead and take our break real quick. In case you are just tuning in, this is Freethought Forum, a program by the Atheist Society of Knoxville and the Rationalists of East Tennessee. Freethought Forum is funded jointly by them and by individual contributions.
and shows are here are live. At least we hope we're live.
Yes.
And starting January, every Wednesday. Now that's beginning in January.
Correct.
From 6:30 to 7:30 p.m. Eastern Time in Knoxville. Access Television Channel 12 or Channel what?
194.
194, depending on your local cable network. Tell your friends and neighbors and so forth to streamline us on what?
ctvknox.org. That's ctvknox.org.
And today's show is live. It's the 5th of December, and you can call in on the number on the screen here. We'll take a short place. Please watch these informative videos about our
865-215. Okay.
And are questioning your religious beliefs or simply believe in one less God than everyone else? Well, you're not alone. The Atheist Society of Knoxville is a fun and friendly group of people just like you that meets twice a week at a bar or restaurant. We meet every Tuesday night following the show. You'll find our group either inside or on the patio. Look for Richard Dawkins' silver-jacketed book, The God Delusion, standing upright on the table. But if you plan to preach, proselytize, provoke, or punch, please don't. We all question what we believe at one point in our lives. If this is the time for you, come join us for food, drink, conversation, and fun. Do you find stories of talking snakes laughable? Do you prefer the scientific method over supernatural beliefs? Are you concerned about religious leaders and organizations imposing their values and rules on your body, your family, and the rest of our society? Well, take comfort in the fact that you're not alone. The Rationalists of East Tennessee meets weekly for fellowship and provides a forum for people who support skeptical thinking and rational discussion of these and other issues. To find out more information or to find out about our next meeting, visit us on the web at www.rationalist.org.
When are we back on? Are you telling
All right.
us? Are we back on?
We're back on.
Back on.
We're thinking here now, should we offer a program someday on what is a sociopath?
I believe so. But go ahead and let you know the Atheist Society of Knoxville, or ASK, meets 1 or 2 times a week. We have evening meetups for fun, food, drink, and conversation. Find us online at knoxvilleatheists.org.
Okay.
The purpose of ASK is to supply a venue for community, camaraderie, and outreach to atheists, agnostic, free thinkers, and other like-minded persons in the East Tennessee area. Our Tuesday meeting is going on right now at West Hills Flats and Taps, 7403 Kingston Pike in Knoxville, 37919. It's just across from Westtown Mall.
Okay, and you're next, right?
All right. So the second Sunday of most months with the Rationalists of East Tennessee is the Skeptics Book Club. We'll meet up at the Books A Million at 2 o'clock on the second Sunday, and that's on 8513 Kingston Pike. And didn't have the book with me, but it's always something interesting, and we have great conversations, and just the best, the greatest, tremendous,
Okay.
and so on.
And then there's the third Sunday meeting in December, and the guest speaker is going to be an MD, Dr. Reynolds, and the topic is the best prescription for U.S. health care reform. And this presentation will include a frank assessment of current health care system, and so with that, some ideas for improvement. Okay, back to the program, huh?
Sounds good. Yep, and remember, this is a call-in show. You can call us
Feel
at
free
the
to call in right
number
away.
on the screen, 865-215-2288.
Okay.
And we're talking about humanism.
And starting off with freedom. Freedom is doing what you want, usually to get freedom and happiness
Yes.
and joy, and then recognizing that in order to get what we want, there are some things we have to deny ourselves. Otherwise, we'll end up in chaos, if not death. So even in a boxing match, when you're slugging it out, you have to have rules and regulations.
Right.
So all of life has rules and regulations. The question is, are they appropriate to the situation? And that's why we have interaction with each other to learn from each other about that. You play a ball game, it's not a game until you have rules and regulations.
Right.
Say,
Yes,
and
it's
if you
just
go to a dentist, you expect the dentist does not look in your ears.
Or while you're unconscious, touch you inappropriately.
Oh yeah, I hadn't
I
thought
mean,
about that.
that's-
But yeah.
If we're talking ethics, yeah,
Sure,
absolutely.
Sure, exactly. Each profession has to have ethical standards. Otherwise, it's not a profession.
Right.
And I think it can sometimes enter into we're talking about the inherent limitations effectively. Even when pursuing ultimate freedom, there still needs to be, I think, a recognition of some inhibitions. Because, as you said earlier, without, it goes along that line that if everyone had all the freedom, then you wouldn't have any freedom.
Well, my mother put it this way. She had a third grade education, but she was loaded with the common sense. If you want self-interest, take care of yourself. And that means part of your self-interest involves other people.
Yes,
So their self-interest.
absolutely.
And that made sense to me as a kid.
Yeah, I mean, that falls down into trust.
Yeah, trust.
Yeah.
A good point.
If someone knows that you're gonna treat them ethically and with respect, then they're more likely to trust
Trust
you.
you. That's a good point. It'd be a trustworthy person.
Yes. Yeah, absolutely.
And if your thief comes in and wants you to steal with them, they can trust you to say no.
Well, I would hope so. And wouldn't even come to you.
Yeah, in the first place.
Right.
Yeah, good.
It reminds me of sorry about the thief and coming in. It reminds me of a small kind of story there. I was speaking with someone. Now I forget who it was, but it was some weeks ago, and they were talking about how they were talking with their Buddhist friend, and they proposed a hypothetical that what were to happen if someone were to break in, assault family members, and take off with some goods or something, and maybe even try to abduct, one member of their family or something like that. The question was posed: how would you react? And what I recall from it is that the Buddhist, his reaction was, we might just let it be, because it was maybe this is me living a second life, and this is my test to be more peaceable about it. But then she responded by saying, well, if this is your second life and you're being tested, maybe you're being tested to stop your family members from being, abducted and taken off. And she just kind of flips it on itself. And it just goes down to boundaries.
Well, you got a good point. In fact, even among Buddhists, you have Hinayana and Theravada, they have differences among themselves because they're trying to work it out. They're just humans the way we are. They're finite. And we got a phone call. Let's see what they have to say. Go ahead.
Hello, Joe. My name is Mitch. A question about humanism.
Oh, yes.
Can you speak louder?
It'll
Oh, can you hear me now?
Yeah, sure can.
Yes.
It just took a moment for the catch up.
Go ahead.
Yeah, so I have a question for you, Joe. Do you think so? Because when we talk about humanism, we imply that it's secular humanism, right?
What kind of humanism? I just didn't hear the
Secular.
word. Huh?
I think it's secular humanism.
Well, no, we're not implying that. We're saying that you can be a theist and be a humanist, or you can be an atheist to be a humanist, or an agnostic. What we have in common is saying that even among theists, you have what's called rational thinking. That's called the image of God in theology. That means that you have some rational thinking. And so as a humanist, you use the reasoning and your feelings. Do you have dogs? The color.
No.
Okay, we've got 2 dogs and a cat. When I'm at the computer, this cat comes in and sits in my lap.
Sounds nice.
Now, my point is cats and dogs and human beings have feelings. And we like to be recognized, to be respected. And that's through the animal kingdom, apparently, even horses. And I had a billy goat as a kid, and I realized my mother had to teach me the billy goat has feelings. And that's how ethics, I think, starts. That's why it's good maybe to have kids growing up with a dog, to how to treat the dog with common sense.
Right.
We all feel pain.
Because we have feelings in common.
Regardless of whether or not it's secular humanism or theistic humanism, it all goes down to the core of having empathy and respect and kindness and treating human beings as you would want them to treat you. It really doesn't matter so much whether or not you're secular or theist. You can still be a humanist.
Humanist, exactly.
In those aspects.
Yeah.
I don't have a problem with the term theistic humanism, but I do find the term Christian humanism, for example, is pretty much oxymoron, because when I read the Bible, for example, in the Genesis, so in the story of Sodom and Gomorrah, when Abraham argued with Yahweh, to spare the city for, it said there are 50 righteous people, and God will surely spare the city. However, when it's come to Isaac, Abraham's son, and he willing, to obey, God, to sacrifice his son.
In the story, does Isaac get sacrificed in the story?
I'm sorry, what is that?
Does Isaac get sacrificed in the story?
No, he's not.
No, that's the point. That's a humanistic point. Isaac is a human, and you don't sacrifice humans. That's the whole point.
Yeah,
I think when we're talking biblically, that's not necessarily 100% equate to Christian humanism, because I think modern day Christians, there's a lot in the Bible that they tend to completely ignore, more the brutal aspects of it. Or they have means of justifying it in order to match their humanism and their humanity.
Exactly.
They find ways to work around it, cognitive dissonance, whatever they need.
Many of them have the word, a notion called progressive revelation.
Yes.
You have to learn.
Wouldn't that be, that's different than, now I forgot the word, there's 2 different types. There's revelations as revealed in time versus revelations as made by different packs. There's a word for that. But I forget the difference between the two, how they're called.
I can't recall either.
But it is highly selective. Just disregarding the inconvenient parts, and they just explain it away because I don't understand it, or...
And also, even if you have the notion of revelation, as the woman who helped raise me was a Baptist Sunday school teacher. I learned a lot of humanism from her. She said, yeah, you got the Bible, but you got a brain, you got to read it. So she could be very blunt about it.
Yeah.
And she said, get off out on the basketball court and start playing and find out you can't just do anything. You end up running into that wall out there.
Right. I mean, I actually had a conversation with my grandmother today. She's Christian. She's very, very Christian. But I was telling her how difficult it is in our area and in many parts of the country and the world to be a secular individual, and told her about just what somebody had posted on the internet recently that I read, where their own grandmother told them that they would be in heaven laughing at them while they were burning in hell.
Oh yeah, that's wicked.
And yeah, absolutely.
But
And when I mentioned it to my grandmother, she's like, well, you and I don't disagree and we don't discuss things. I said, but you would never say something like that to me, your grandchild. And that is an example of humanism, because she would never want somebody to say that to her.
I debated an evangelical Christian once, and I contended he was an atheist. I said, you're in the same camp with Joseph Stalin, only Stalin is much better. Because you're going to say at the end of the world, all the Jews and all the Hindus and all the Buddhists will be sent to the eternal concentration camp to hell with you. And I said, even most thugs like Hitler and Stalin weren't that bad. And you're an atheist because what you have, what you call God, doesn't even measure up. It's pathetic. They didn't bait me anymore.
Yeah.
Yeah, Joe, that's the point. So I don't think how a devout, Islamic or Christian can be called into a humanist, because, the scripture would really bizarre. To be honest, when I read the story, even, in the New Testament, like in Gospel of John, when Jesus said, whoever is not guilty, I think what he would be adulterous woman. He said, whoever not guilty, just cast the first stone on her. But then after his resurrection, he said, go around, preach the gospel, and whoever do not accept will be condemned. I don't understand how.
Right. That's a very anti-humanistic
It's
point.
It's just ruthless. It's in the category of Stalin and Hitler. There's no other way to put it. That's just mean, vicious.
That's right. Yeah.
Right.
And a lot of Christians have come up with the notion that hell is just now. A lot of life has a lot of hell in it, but after you die, that's another matter.
Yeah.
And that's revived. In other words, the Reformation is still going on. It's in the process.
And it's an interesting notion to suggest that, and depending where you come from as well, perspective. Say you're coming from a pagan perspective, or a Jewish perspective, Hindu perspective, a Sikh perspective, any of that, a Christian perspective. The version of hell will differ, the version of heaven will differ. But the premise seems to remain the same, that it seems morally absurd. And to kind of echo Matt Dillahunty on this, it seems morally absurd to suggest that any amount of finite actions would equate to infinite actions. Eventually, it just breaks down to not adding up logically, sensibly.
We ought to have a program someday